He called her worthless in front of 400 people. He had no idea her father was already in the elevator. 6 minutes before that, the Harrington Grand Gala still looked like the kind of night that ends in a press photo and a toast. The Meridian Hotel's top-floor ballroom was all gold light and dark glass, Chicago spread out below like scattered diamonds. 400 guests in black tie moved through the space like a slow, expensive current. There were senators, hedge fund managers, at least 6 people whose names you'd recognize from the business section of any major newspaper. And there was Naomi. She arrived in a simple navy dress, no diamonds, no designer label anyone could have named. She'd driven herself in her 6-year-old Volvo, tipped the valet $20, and learned his name was Carlos before she reached the door. Inside, she spotted the coat check attendant struggling with a rack that had slipped its track. Without a word, Naomi set down her small clutch and steadied the rack with both hands while the young woman, her name tag said Bree, scrambled to rehang the coats. "You've got it now," Naomi said. "The back wheel catches. You have to lift first, then push." Bree exhaled like she hadn't breathed in 10 minutes. "Thank you. Nobody ever. Don't mention it." Naomi picked up her clutch and walked on. She knew what she looked like in this room. She had dressed this way deliberately, just as she had for the past 18 months since she married into this family. She wanted to know if they could love the woman. Not the name, not the number. They could not. Ethan found her near the windows and took her hand the way he always did, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he wasn't the heir to one of the most powerful real estate dynasties in the Midwest. He was the one thing in this building that didn't make her feel like a smudge on clean glass. "My father's been watching the door all night," he said quietly. "He's in a mood." "When isn't he?" "Tonight's worse. The Crest deal." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. 8 months, and their chairman won't even take the call. If it falls apart, the North Shore development goes with it. Naomi said nothing. She sipped her water and watched the room. Around them, the real conversations were happening in tight clusters near the bar. She caught fragments as she and Ethan moved through. 1/4 away from a covenant breach. "If Crest Holdings doesn't sign, we're finished." They said the name Edmund Crest, the way drowning men name a life preserver. Naomi had heard that name many times before. She should have. It was her father's name. She didn't say a word. She smiled at a passing server, asked if he'd eaten yet tonight, and when he looked startled, she pressed a folded bill into his palm and told him to grab something from the kitchen when he got a break. He stared at her like she was a different species from everyone else in the room. She was. Victor Harrington found her 20 minutes later. He was silver-haired and broad-shouldered, the kind of man who'd spent 60 years being the most important person in every room he walked into. He had the handshake of someone granting a favor. When his eyes landed on Naomi, they went flat in a way that had nothing to do with surprise. He had decided who she was the first night Ethan brought her home, a woman who had seen an opening and taken it. He had her investigated 6 months ago. The report came back thin. No family trust, no inherited wealth, no connections worth a conversation. To Victor, this was damning. To Naomi, it was exactly what she had arranged. "You," he said. He didn't lower his voice. Around them, the room had already begun to quiet. "I want a word." "Of course, Mr. Harrington." "Don't of course me like we're friends. 18 months my son has been married to you, and I still don't know where you come from. I don't know your people. I don't know your money. I don't know why you're standing in my event in a dress that cost less than the centerpieces." Guests nearby stopped pretending to look elsewhere. "I've never hidden anything from you, sir." "You've hidden everything." He stepped closer. "Let me tell you what I see. A woman with no name and no fortune who attached herself to my son and has been coasting on this family's reputation ever since. Someone who looked at Ethan and saw a future she couldn't build herself." He spread his hands. "I had a firm look into you. Very thorough, very expensive. And do you know what they found? Nothing. No estate. No family worth a handshake. Just a woman who appeared out of thin air and aimed high." "Your firm wasn't looking in the right places," Naomi said. "My firm," Victor said, "looks in every place, and the absence of anything is its own kind of answer." He let the silence hold for a moment. "You came from nothing, and you will never be anything in this family." "Dad," Ethan's voice came in sharp, "that's enough. Stay out of this. She is my wife. She is a liability." Victor turned back to Naomi, slower now. He was performing. He knew the room was listening and he wanted the room. "I am going to make this simple. Her or this family. Her or your name. Her or every door this family has ever opened for you." His voice dropped to something soft, which was worse than the shouting. "Choose carefully, Ethan, because the second you pick that woman, you are no longer a Harrington." The ballroom went quiet enough to hear the ice settling in the glasses. Ethan stood still. He looked at his father, at the guests arranged around them like a jury, at Naomi, at the woman who'd known Carlos's name before she reached the door, who'd fixed Bree's coat rack without being asked, who had never once asked him for a single thing that money could touch. "I don't need to think about it," Ethan said. Victor's chin lifted slightly, certain of his win. "I choose her." Ethan's voice was steady. "I will always choose her." Something moved across Victor's face, the look of a man who called a bluff and lost. Then it hardened into something uglier. "Get out." The words came rough and low. "Both of you. You're dead to this family, Ethan. You walk through those doors with her and you don't come back. You hear me? Nothing. You'll have nothing but her. And we both know that's nothing at all." Naomi took her husband's hand. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She turned quietly toward the door. She stopped walking when Constance Harrington gasped. It was calibrated, the way Constance did everything, just enough to turn heads, just short of a scene. She stood by the far window, one hand pressed to the front of her silk wrap. "My brooch," she breathed. "My mother's brooch. It was right here. It's gone." Her eyes swept the room and landed on Naomi with the speed of something that had already been aimed. "She was standing right next to me. Not 20 minutes ago. She touched my arm." "I never touched you," Naomi said. "Liar." Constance didn't raise her voice, which made it worse. "I know what I felt. I know what I had." She turned to the room with wide, injured eyes. "I warned Victor. The moment she walked in, I said something feels wrong. And now my mother's brooch." "Garrett." Victor had already turned. The head of security, broad, composed, with the flat attention of a man who filed his doubts for later, stepped out from near the wall. "My wife's brooch is missing." This woman was standing next to her. Garrett's eyes moved to Naomi. A muscle in his jaw shifted. "Sir, I'd need her to consent to—" "This is my event. Search her bag." The ballroom had become a single-held breath. Phones rose, slowly at first, then all at once. 30 screens glowing red in the candlelight. Naomi looked at Garrett. "You don't have to do this." "He doesn't have a choice," Victor said. "Open it." She held out her clutch, almost apologetically, though the word barely fit here, and turned it over in full view of the room. A phone, a folded receipt, lip balm, a house key. He shook it once, twice. Nothing. "Check the lining," Constance said. Garrett ran his thumb along the inside, shook it again harder, held it upside down and waited. Still nothing. "There's nothing here, Mrs. Harrington," he said carefully. Then she hit it on her person. "Keep looking." "That's enough." Ethan lunged forward. A second guard caught him by the shoulders. "Get your hands off her things. She didn't take anything." "Hold him," Victor said. The guard's hands locked down. Ethan strained against them, jaw tight, unable to break free. Naomi caught his eyes. She gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet. Wait." She stood very still in the center of it. 400 people. 400 phones. A guard holding her husband, her empty clutch still dangling from Garrett's hand, and the host of the party staring at her with open satisfaction, certain he had finally caught something. "Mrs. Harrington," Naomi said, and her voice carried clean across the quiet. "Your brooch is pinned to the inside of your wrap. You folded it over near the fireplace when you adjusted your earring. I watched you do it, about 40 minutes ago." Every head turned toward Constance. Constance looked down at the silk wrap over her arm. Her hand moved to the inside hem slowly, with the careful reluctance of a woman who already knows what she's going to find. She pinched something between 2 fingers and pulled it free. The brooch rose into the light, a small knot of rubies and old gold, and sent red glints skating across the ceiling. A footman stepped forward, lifted it from her fingers, and held it up for the room to see. The silence changed shape. 3 women near the bar set down their drinks at the same moment. An older man in the corner reached quietly for his coat. Nobody laughed. Nobody looked comfortable. Whatever kind of night this had been, it had curdled into something none of them wanted footage of themselves standing near. Naomi had been accused, searched, and paraded in front of 400 witnesses. She had been right the entire time. Victor looked at the brooch, his face held for one long second. Then, that proves nothing. She could have planned to take it later. People like her always have an angle. People like her, Ethan repeated, low and shaking, the guards having finally released him. Say it plainer, Dad. Say exactly what you mean. I mean what I say. She does not belong here. She never will. Victor stepped close to Naomi, close enough that she could smell the bourbon on his breath. He lowered his voice to something almost gentle, which was worse than anything that had come before it. I am going to make sure you leave here with nothing, he murmured. No husband, no name, no foothold in this city. You picked the wrong family to attach yourself to. Naomi looked up at him. She was not shaking. Mr. Harrington, she said, you've spent this entire evening telling me what I don't have. You haven't once asked yourself what you don't know. Something crossed his face, there and gone, like a draft moving a candle flame. He laughed it off. Is that a threat? From you? He shook his head. You don't have the power to threaten anyone in this room. I don't need power, Naomi said. I just need to wait. Outside the tall windows, past the lit skyline and the dark street below, an elevator in the lobby opened. A door swung, and a man walked through the hotel's main entrance, who moved the way men move when they have never once in their life been told to wait. He was in his early 60s, plain dark overcoat, no tie, no cufflinks, nothing to mark him as anyone worth a second glance. He moved through the lobby unhurried and stepped into the ballroom and stopped just inside the entrance. His eyes moved slowly across the room, the guards, the clutch still in Garrett's hand, the brooch now resting on a silver footman's tray, his daughter standing in the middle of all of it. His face, until that moment entirely still, went cold. Not angry, something quieter than anger, something more final. He walked forward. Constance stepped into his path near the entrance, hostess reflex, taking in the plain coat and arriving instantly at the wrong conclusion. Excuse me, she said in the tone she reserved for people who had arrived somewhere they weren't supposed to be. The service entrance is 1 floor down. If you're with the catering company. The man stopped. He looked at Constance. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the calm, patient expression of a man who has just been handed the last piece of evidence he needed. Thank you, he said quietly. That's genuinely helpful. Constance blinked. Something in his voice didn't match the coat. He kept walking. Near the bar, Roland Voss, Victor's CFO, 22 years with the company, had gone the color of old paper. He'd been holding his phone when the man came through. He set it on the bar now, very carefully, the way people set things down when their hands are no longer reliable. Mr. Harrington. Roland's voice came out too thin. Not now, Roland. Sir, louder. Sir, I need you to look at who just walked in. Victor turned. He saw a man in a plain coat. He saw no one who required his attention. Have him escorted. Victor. Roland never used his first name. 22 years, never once. That is Edmund Crest. The name hit the ballroom like a tray dropped in total silence. Edmund Crest, chairman of Crest Holdings, the man whose fund held $4.2 billion in assets under management, the man who had not returned a single phone call, a single email, a single handwritten note in 8 months, while Victor's North Shore development bled cash, and the board quietly counted down the quarters, the man they had said tonight like a prayer. He was standing 14 feet away in a coat that cost nothing, and his hand was resting lightly on Naomi's shoulder. Hi, Dad, she said softly. Victor's mouth opened. No sound came out. Edmund Crest looked at his daughter for a moment, steadily, the way you look at someone you have worried about from a distance. And then he turned to face the room. My daughter married your son 18 months ago, he said. His voice didn't rise, didn't need to. In all that time, she never once told you who I was. She drove a modest car. She wore simple dresses. She let you all believe whatever you chose to believe about her. He paused. She gave your family 18 months to show her 1 ounce of decency. His eyes settled on Victor. And tonight, when you were certain she had nothing and no one standing behind her, you showed her exactly who you are. He looked once around the room. 400 people, every phone raised. Now everyone in this room knows it too. He reached into his coat and took out his phone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He dialed and lifted the phone to his ear and waited. Somehow the calm was more devastating than any rage could have been. "It's Edmund," he said. "The Harrington Partnership Agreement. Freeze it tonight and begin termination in the morning." A pause. "I'm certain. I'll explain everything when I'm back." He hung up. Victor made a sound with no name in it. He reached behind him for the back of a chair and missed it, and went down slowly, one knee hitting the polished marble first, then the other, his suit folding beneath him on the floor he'd been so proud of. The same floor he'd told Naomi she had no right to stand on. He sat there, 400 people, 40 phones recording every second. "Get up," Constance hissed, still frozen with the harap in her hands and the brooch on the footman's tray. "Victor, get up." Victor could not get up. The most powerful man in the room had arrived in a coat that cost nothing, and the empire built on 40 years of certainty was coming apart in a single night. Roland Voss stepped quietly away from his boss, opening small, careful distance. He was already thinking about the board meeting, about the morning calls, about what kind of company could be salvaged from the wreckage of one man's pride. Garrett, the security chief, opened his hands at his sides and stepped back, the look of a man who had followed the wrong order in front of too many witnesses. Ethan crossed the room and pulled Naomi close and held her without saying anything for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for all of it, for him." "You chose me," she said. "That's everything. That's all I ever needed." Edmund put one hand on his son-in-law's shoulder. "You stood between her and your own father when you believed it would cost you everything." He looked at Ethan with the steady attention of a man making a permanent judgment. "I won't forget that." Victor watched the three of them from the floor, a small circle of warmth he would never be part of. Something moved in his face, not rage this time, understanding, the kind that comes too late to change anything. He had been handed a daughter-in-law whose family could have opened every door his company had spent 2 years pressing its face against. He had spent 18 months making sure she felt unwelcome every time she walked through his. By morning, the whole country had seen it. The videos were stitched and captioned before the valet finished parking the last car. 30 different angles. Edmund's phone call. The brooch rising into the light, Naomi's face during the bag search, dry-eyed, completely still, carrying something heavier than anger. Victor on the ballroom floor of his own hotel. The headlines were almost too easy. Harrington Enterprises opened Monday morning and fell 41% by noon. 2 institutional investors pulled out before the closing bell. The board called an emergency session. They did not invite Victor. The new interim CEO, Roland Voss, issued a full company ethics policy his first day in the chair. He had it framed and hung by the executive elevator where every partner, every associate, every visitor would see it walking off the elevator. It was the first thing you read when you arrived at the top floor. The civil case was filed within the week. What had happened in that ballroom had names in a courtroom: unlawful detention, false accusation, an illegal search carried out on one man's unilateral word in front of 400 witnesses. Harrington's legal team settled before any depositions were taken. The apology was not sealed. It was entered into the public record in plain language, signed by both Victor and Constance, and it said what had happened and who had done it. The clubs called it a membership review. The charities said they were moving in a new direction. Invitations simply stopped arriving. A name that had opened every door in this city for 40 years became, overnight, something people mentioned in a different tone, with a pause before it, a small, careful distance, the way you mention something that used to mean one thing and now means another. Naomi gave no interviews. When reporters positioned themselves outside their building, she brought coffee down and asked them gently, please, to give the family some room. She never posted anything. She never made a statement. Her silence said everything a press release couldn't. Edmund made one public comment, exactly one, when a reporter called out a question as he left his Chicago office. He stopped. He looked into the camera. "I don't do business," he said, "with people who treat strangers like problems to be managed. That's not principle. That's just good sense." Then he got in his car and drove away. The clip made it around the world before dinner. 6 months later, almost nothing about Naomi had changed. Same modest car, same simple dresses. She still learned the names of servers and coat check attendants wherever she went. She still tipped Carlos the valet. She still stopped to help when a rack slipped its track. The money had always been there, her entire life, behind her, like a wall she'd never needed to lean against. She had simply never used it to decide how to treat people. Ethan stood taller now, the slow, grinding fear he'd carried for 30 years, his father's voice in every decision, his father's approval as the measure of every choice, was gone. Burned away clean the night he said, "I choose her," into a room full of people waiting for him to flinch. He had lost his inheritance and felt, under the circumstances, completely free. Edmund watched them build their life and was at peace. He never gloated about that evening. He had walked into a room full of people who looked at a plain coat and saw nobody, and he had let them be exactly who they were. That was the whole lesson. He never had to raise his voice to teach it. And somewhere across the city, in a house smaller than the one he'd built and quieter than the one he'd imagined, Victor Harrington sat in front of a muted television and watched a clip he would never stop seeing. The marble floor, the one phone call, the three of them walking out together through the tall glass doors. He had been right about one thing. There was a nobody in that ballroom the night it all came down. It just wasn't Naomi. Here's what I keep coming back to. This is a work of fiction. Naomi, Ethan, Victor, the Meridian Hotel, none of it is real, but the part that moved you, the part that made something tighten in your chest during that bag search, that isn't fiction. That happens in real rooms, with real people, every single day. Someone decides what another person is worth before they say a word, based on a dress, a car, a zip code, a name. And most of the time, there's no Edmund Crest getting off an elevator. There's no contract to cancel. There's no moment where the room finds out it was wrong. Most of the time, the woman in the simple dress just goes home. So the question was never really about Victor. We all know what Victor should have done. The question is about the 400 people who stood there and watched. If you had been in that ballroom, before anyone knew who Edmund was, before the phones came out, when it was just a woman in a navy dress being told she didn't belong, would you have said something? Or would you have watched and stayed quiet, the way most of us do when the cost of speaking up feels uncertain? Be honest, I read every comment. Drop your answer below, I want to know. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like it so more people find their way to it. And subscribe to Velvet Verdict, because we're here for exactly these stories, the ones where the person they underestimated was holding all the cards the whole time. The most powerful person in any room is rarely the loudest one. Sometimes, it's the woman who already knew Bree's name before she needed to ask.